In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Good evening, friends, and welcome to Crime and Punishment, the official podcast of the Invictus Law Firm, PA, a criminal defense law firm in Orlando, Florida, the website for which is augustusinvictus.com. I used to say this is a legal podcast, not a political one, but here we are in America. The law and politics are the same thing. Everybody knows it now. You'll have to excuse me. I am just sharing this because I'm terrible at the social media aspect. We've also got to check the audio, check the levels, make sure everybody can hear me because sometimes we miss that. You also might have missed that Tucker Carlson was plotting an interview of Vladimir Putin. Apparently he was summoned to Washington because the NSA was reading his signal messages. So a couple of morals to this story. Number one, the NSA can read your signal messages. Don't trust things. I don't trust Telegram. I don't trust Signal. Just assume somebody's watching your stuff and they can see all of your memes and whatever Fed posting you're doing with your friends. So just be smart out there. Here's another moral to this story. We've talked before on this program about the trial of Ezra Pound. I think we did a two-part series on that. We read the book, The Trial of Ezra Pound, by his defense attorney. And he was tried for essentially for war crimes as a propagandist for fascist Italy. He was an expatriate, an American poet, an expatriate in Italy. And he did a bunch of educational broadcasts during the Second World War. The allegation being that he was undermining the American war effort by making these broadcasts to change the minds of the American GIs, right? So Tucker Carlson has to think, if we go to war with Russia, how is this going to play out for him afterwards? He's already going to be accused of being Russian propaganda. He already is accused of being a Russian propagandist, but that's going to be substantially reinforced if he interviews Putin. I think Tucker's still of that mind that we live in a 1950s American democracy. And I hope this program has disabused you of that at this point. And if it hasn't yet, it should tonight. I'm going to talk about 4 very specific things about the trial of Adolf Hitler. I've made these very specific because, as you know, listening to these programs, I tend to just read and just shoot off the cuff. But I have to be very specific because I cannot go into certain territories these days. So, we're going to limit this discussion to 4 things. And the 2 books that we're reading from tonight, one is called 1924, The Year That Made Hitler, by Peter Ross Range, and the other is The Trial of Adolf Hitler, by David King. The one from Range, I think, is a fascinating book, just in literary terms. It's about the year that made Hitler, hence the title, his year in the Landsberg fortress. Talks about the putsch, all the politics leading up to it, the failure of the putsch, and his his trial for high treason. And of course the writing of Mein Kampf. It's obviously anti-Hitler, but very vivid book, very good detail, well written, good storytelling. The trial of Adolf Hitler is a little more, it's a little more dry, a little more Marxist, but it does have painstaking detail about the trial. Obviously taken not just from contemporary journalist accounts, but from the transcripts of the trial, it seems. So, the 4 areas we're going to talk about in these 2 books. Number 1, the conditions at Landsberg prison. Number 2, his discussion with the prosecutor before the beginning of the trial. Number 3, Hitler speaking in his own defense as a defendant in the trial. And number 4, the sentence that he received. Well, he and his co-defendants. So, let's go first to, looks like the audio is working. Like I said, Missouri battle flag, there are certain things I cannot talk about. We are not talking about that. So we're going to stick to the books, and we're going to stick to the subject matter. Located, this is from 1924, by the way, the first of the two books. Located 38 miles west of Munich, Landsberg prison was a modern penal institution in a charming, small municipality on a meandering alpine river called the Lech. The medieval town had the requisite cobblestoned streets and bubbling fountain, once the source of village drinking water, along with several bakeries and pubs on the main square. It could have been any of the rustic Bavarian market towns that dotted the region. What made Landsberg on Lech special was that it had a state prison on the edge of town and, nearby, a Reichswehr garrison. In years to come, Landsberg would become a hotbed of Nazism, a place of pilgrimage, and, to its shame, the center of a collection of World War II slave labor camps. But on this wind-lashed night, and the chapter here, this is chapter 6, it starts off very dramatic about this stormy night when Hitler came to Landsberg Fortress. But on this wind-lashed night, Landsberg was just a sleepy burg of no special renown. Its prison, a state-of-the-art penitentiary that housed 500 convicts, had been opened in 1909. Though it had a brownish, faux fortress main gate, 2 fat, onion-domed towers with an arched entryway, the prison's interior was thoroughly modern, consciously modeled on the latest American panopticon design. 4 large wings, 4 stories high, joined in the middle by a central watch station with easy access to all cells in all 4 directions. Let's stop there and talk about that, all right? Because the next part is the whole point of doing this section. But listen to this. First of all, this state-of-the-art penitentiary, this fortress, this, apparently garish, just gaudy, horribly modern prison in this medieval town. What a contrast. Holds 500 people. The Orange County Jail here holds like 3,500 people. Massive. Massive. Our prison industry in this freest country of the world, where we, by the way, incarcerate 5% of our population, last I checked, has massive jail complexes everywhere. Everywhere. This is just Orange County, Florida, with this massive, sprawling jail complex, where I have been a guest a couple times. I've been practicing as a lawyer there for over a decade, but I've been a guest there too. And they think Landsberg is this horrible place. I think any Orange County inmate, veteran, would just die to be in Landsberg prison. Here's the other thing to notice. It was consciously modeled on the latest American panopticon design. 4 large wings, 4 stories high, joined in the middle by a central watch station with easy access to all cells in all 4 directions. And where did that come from? It comes from Foucault. Discipline and punish. Foucault was communist. All the French philosophers were. Really all of them were. French philosophy is terrible. So Aiden, if you are listening, cut it out with modern quote-unquote existentialists and read the Catholic philosophers, the real philosophers. The panopticon design of the modern jail, the thought of it was, well, we're going to just surveil these prisoners 24/7. And if they know that they're under guard and under watch and everybody can see everything they're doing, then they will develop a conscience. Because clearly they don't have a conscience. They just don't understand that things are wrong, and they don't think about their actions. And it's very, very French intellectual liberal when you think about it. Like, we're just going to watch these guys all the time, and then they'll develop consciences, and they'll be human, and we can let them back out into the world. That was the original thought behind it. Obviously, that's not how we use it now. We use the panopticon design of the jail now in the same way that we use, traffic light cameras. Any of the CCTV cameras all about town. I forget the acronym for it, but I was reading it in a case earlier today, actually. The system where the cops will tag your car everywhere you go. ALDR? I can't remember the acronym to save my life right now. But all of these high-tech gadgets we have that surveil you everywhere, ostensibly, yeah, it's so that, if you run a red light, they can give you a camera ticket, Ostensibly, these cameras are set up outside of post offices and shops to prevent theft and looting. Really, what it is a surveillance state that has been implemented under our noses. We all live in the panopticon now. Those are two major things to realize here. Number one, the exponential explosion of the inmate population in modern times, in our civilized modern times. And number two, the panopticon design for prisoners is now all of society. Now, we're going to get into the relevant portion. Yet there was one difference. Landsberg prison had a special wing for special prisoners. It was called Die Festung, the fortress. The so-called fortress was, however, nothing of the sort. It was simply a contemporary, in 1909, two-story rectangular whitewashed building with an orange tile roof connected by a corridor to the main prison. There's a footnote here that says numerous books have mistakenly referred to an old fortress at Landsberg, but there was none there. The building originally had been designed for small prison industries, then became a prison wing for political inmates. The name Festung, or fortress, derived from Germany's 19th century tradition of putting political offenders, prisoners of conscience, and members of nobility, such as duelists, into a local fortress tower for an honorable imprisonment under relaxed conditions. Dueling was a semi-tolerated crime of honor. In modern times, the name had remained codified in law, but the fortress towers had not. Modern, again, this is 1924. Adolf Hitler, like many other political prisoners during the 1920s, would serve his time under quote-unquote fortress arrest, better translated as quote-unquote honorable imprisonment, and a minimum security facility, also called custodia honesta in some countries. Hitler's so-called fortress looked more like a dormitory than a castle, though the dorm had 2-foot-thick walls and bars on the windows. Anyone who expected to find a romantic whiff of mossy castles with damp vaults was bitterly disappointed, wrote one prisoner. Think about that. Here in America, and in all the West, where we are so civilized, and the ancients are so barbaric, here, we don't execute people anymore. Capital punishment is just awful. Barbaric, it's hideous. Bloodthirsty. Bloodthirsty Texas conservatives do that. What are you, Dracula? No, we imprison people for life. That's the humane thing to do. We destroy families. We have children grow up without fathers, or more like with distant fathers who are in prison for decades at a time. We allow children to grow up with that shame of having their father gone. That's the humane thing to do. We don't kill these guys. After all, we're rehabilitating them as they execute our slave labor at the private prison industries. But here's the most important thing. These political prisoners, right? We don't have those anymore. We just have criminals and law-abiding citizens. Only barbaric, tyrant, dictator Nazis, fascist Nazi monsters, and white supremacist dictators. Only they have political prisoners. We only prosecute crimes. We don't have political prisoners in America, where we are civilized, and we would never prosecute our political enemies. But those people in those times, those barbarians, they did recognize that there were political prisoners. And they kept them under honorable conditions. They kept them in minimum security. Now our political prisoners are kept in maximum security. They're kept in isolation. We've learned a lot from the trial of Adolf Hitler, which is why this trial is so relevant today. The procedures are very different, but the lessons, boy, we have put those to work here in America and in all of the West. So you're going to see things later on like the procedures of testimony in court, wildly different from what we do in America. This notion that there are political prisoners and they are treated honorably, wildly different from America, where we have no political prisoners, right? You'll notice that Hitler, who is charged with high treason for overthrowing the government, or attempting to, people actually died, right? Actually died. He's in the same place as aristocratic gentlemen who are dueling. That's how you treat a political prisoner in these horrible dark ages of a barbaric time. He's also in jail with Count Anton Graf von Arco auf Valley. So check out this next paragraph. This is a person who shares the honorable conditions of Hitler, who's charged with high treason for a putsch where people actually died. They're all in the same place as duelists. A striking political irony awaited Hitler and Landsberg. The only prisoner in the fortress at this time was Count Anton Graf von Arco auf Valley. The nationalist nobleman, in a fit of what he considered patriotism, had shot dead Bavaria's governor, Kurt Eisner, on a Munich street in 1919. By killing the socialist governor, Arco Valley, as he was generally called, helped unleash the political tumult that led to a 3-week communist takeover of Bavaria in April 1919 by a council republic. That short-lived republic ended in an appalling bloodbath, stirring up a far-right backlash that nurtured, among other groups, the Nazis. For murdering Eisner, the nationalistic Arco Valley had been sentenced to death, only to have his term commuted to life under fortress or honorable arrest. He occupied the only cell in Landsberg's fortress that was considered suitable for incarceration of a notable figure, with space for a guard in the anteroom, wrote Hemrich, the prison guard. And then it goes on to say that, well, Hitler's notability now eclipsed his, and he was taken out of this cell, and Hitler was given the nice cell. But the point is, this guy assassinated a governor. And he is held not as a murderer, as we would do in enlightened America, not as a murderer, but as a political prisoner. Horrific. How could they do that? How could they hold political prisoners? How could they prosecute somebody for a political act? We know better. We charge him with murder, put him on death row, put him in AdMax or in some other high-security prison, watch all of his communications, never let him speak to anybody again, destroy his family, destroy his reputation. That's how we do things. That's the American way. So, that's the first piece we're going to talk about, or we did talk about. First piece is the conditions for political prisoners in jail. We don't have political prisoners. We charge people with crimes. And so they're put in the same jail, in the same conditions as everyone else, on a best case scenario. Best case scenario. You are a far-right lunatic like Hitler, and you are arrested on whatever crime we're going to make up this time around, best case scenario, you're going to be in general population with every other meth head, crack addict, actual murderer, thief, rapist. You're in with all of them. No honorable conditions. You're a run-of-the-mill criminal. That's best case scenario. More often, when you are first arrested, you will be placed in isolation. Because, not because of your politics, don't get me wrong. We don't have political prisoners. We don't isolate people because of their political views. No, we isolate people with extreme backgrounds for their own protection. After all, it could be a high-profile media case. And you wouldn't want this general population of actual criminals attacking you for what they saw in the news. So, we will put you in 23-1. It's called 23-1. It's really, we let you out whenever we feel like it, but you're in isolation. You're on permanent lockdown. You get 1 hour to take a shower, use the phones. If there's a computer where you can write emails or order commissary, which is your honey buns and ramen noodles and toothpaste, whatever you need, you get 1 hour to do all of that in a day and go outside if you're allowed outside, because most places don't let you go outside. They don't have the facilities, especially post-COVID. These are the conditions you are probably going to score. Unless they really don't know who you are, or your, we won't say political background, but your extremist background. And then you might luck out and go to general population. Right? Huge difference. We have learned our lesson. This is why we don't have political prisoners anymore. That and the trial we're about to get to. Because those are just the conditions in the prison while he's waiting for the trial. We haven't even started the trial yet. So, that was the first subject. The second subject, if you're late to class here, we're talking about 4 very specific things and nothing else. We're talking about 1, the conditions in jail for political prisoners. 2, Hitler speaking with the prosecutor before the beginning of the trial. Number 3, Hitler speaking in his own defense as a defendant in the trial. And number 4, the sentence for Hitler and his co-defendants. So, let's talk about number 2. Don't talk to the prosecutor. This is from the next 3 sections we're going to do. This is from The Trial of Adolf Hitler by David King. The trial, it was announced in December, would be not by jury, but by a tribunal of judges. It is generally felt, the New York Tribune reported, that Hitler will be executed. Other observers, like the American vice consul in Munich, Robert Murphy, predicted a long imprisonment and then deportation. In fact, you will see later that the mandatory sentence, I believe, for high treason is life imprisonment if you're not executed, right? Here's another difference between German law in the 1920s and American law, certainly today. You don't get a tribunal of judges. You choose either between a jury trial or a bench trial. A jury of your so-called peers or the judge, one judge, right? Who's going to decide your fate. So in Hitler's case, this was a tribunal of judges. Hitler was still not cooperating with authorities. After threatening suicide and launching a short-lived hunger strike, which is talked about in detail in the other book, 1924, Hitler now refused to talk. The prosecutor, Ludwig Stenglein, a conservative Bavarian in his 54th year, was getting nowhere with the recalcitrant prisoner until he handed over the questioning to his deputy. This was Hans Ehard, a young lawyer from a Bamberg Catholic family who looked much younger than his 36 years of age. Ehard had just been promoted to this position the previous month. In fact, he had only served in this capacity for 7 days when Hitler stormed the beer hall. Ehard, however, would prove to be an inspired choice. As a boy, a son of a local government official, Erhard had wanted to be a judge. At law school in Munich and Würzburg, he had shown his potential, graduating magna cum laude. He had served during the war as a clerk for the military court, moving with his regiment to Russia, Serbia, and France, and earning an Iron Cross second class, among other medals. Since then, he had moved to Munich with his wife, Anna Eleanor, or Annalore, the daughter of a brewery owner, and their 3.5-year-old son, Karl Hans. Erhard loved to read and play the cello in a string quartet, though he'd have less time for these pursuits. He had just been handed the most high-profile case of his career. The young prosecutor was a thinker. People often criticized him, he later said, for not being energetic enough or hesitating too long before a major decision, and he understood those criticisms. That was his temperament. It was deliberate, reflective, and methodical. Know yourself and always control yourself was one of his mottos. Another was to recognize what is important, hope for the best, and do what is possible. Sounds like a very reasonable young man. Erhard would, of course, need every advantage that hard-earned perspective could provide given the ordeal that lay ahead. On December 13th, 1923, the young prosecutor took the train to Landsberg to see if he could, as Schenglein put it, get something out of Hitler. It would be a long day. Erhard sat across a small table from Hitler, who took his seat in a wicker chair, his arm still in a sling. Again, vividly described in 1924. During the putsch, he locked arms with a member of the party. That guy was shot, and as he, fell on the ground, he jerked Hitler with him, arm still in arm, and viciously dislocated Hitler's shoulder. So it's been in a sling for the entire story to this point. So, Erhard asked if Hitler was still in pain. There was no answer. Was he prepared for the talk? Erhard next asked. Hitler just stared at him, his pale blue eyes hard and repellent, shooting daggers of hate. Erhard felt that Hitler, as he later put it, was going to eat me. Erhard advised him his right to hire a lawyer. There was still no response. He was only here to do his job, Erhard continued, still speaking calmly as possible and treading carefully as if he were handling a raw egg. I have nothing to say, Hitler eventually declared, turning toward the wall. He would not be deceived by any lawyer tricks, he added. And everything that he had to say was going in a memoir that he planned to write. When Erhard pressed further, asking about his actions, accomplices, and background, Hitler did not budge, claiming that he would not jeopardize his political career by giving you a statement. Cooperation was in his own interests, Erhard countered, as well as those of his fellow accused. Hitler shrugged. He had his own role in history to consider, and the verdict of this court meant nothing to him. Erhard then had an idea. He asked the stenographer to pack up the typewriter and leave the room. He put away pen and paper. Claiming to be intrigued by his politics, Erhard said he wanted to talk. There will be no record, no protocol, he said. We'll just talk. As Erhard later put it, this simple ruse worked like a charm. Hitler launched into a long political harangue as if he were addressing a beer hall full of fanatical supporters rather than a single prosecutor in the prison's visiting room. He could not answer a simple question with a clear, concise response, spewing invective and sometimes also spraying saliva around the room. Erhard later joked that he could have used an umbrella. Charming. The torrent ran on for 5 hours. At the end, the prosecutor thanked Hitler for the illuminating interview and went to type up every point he could remember. It would be a document 15 pages in length. And check this out. Without the benefit of the stenographer, who is also a witness, you have no idea what that prosecutor has just typed up according to his own memory. Now, this is, thank God, for Hitler that is, this is a conservative Catholic prosecutor. Chances are he's not just going to go make up something or deliberately twist what you have said. That's not most prosecutors. This was an important start, providing insight into Hitler's upcoming strategy, but Erhard feared that Hitler would, as he threatened, save his best arguments for the trial. So 2 major lessons in this mistake of Hitler's. Number 1, that is the same mistake, but 2 lessons from it. That mistake is, do not talk to the prosecutor before your trial. For God's sake. Don't talk to the cops either. Not without your lawyer. 2 lessons of this. Number 1, if they're pretending that it's off the record, they're pretending that it's off the record. It is a ruse. You are almost certainly being recorded, but even if you're not, I think it's even worse if you're not, because then they can do what this guy did and just go write it up afterward, and you are at the mercy of their recollection, which, if they have political motives, is going to be completely warped. A second major lesson from this major mistake by Hitler: he has disclosed to Erhard, to the prosecution, to the government, what his defense strategy is and what his arguments are going to be. Huge mistake. Huge. Obviously, he saved some things, and it's months and months before the trial, so he, didn't show all of his cards, but now they know where he's going to go with this, and that lets them be more prepared. So a lot of people want to get on the media and talk about their case and go on interviews and podcasts and say everything and get it off their chest and say everything about what they're going to do at trial. You are advised against that by your attorney for a reason. And that reason is they are listening to it, and they are not just going to twist it against you, but they are going to know your entire strategy at trial. So, learn from that mistake. That's the second point. Now, for those just coming into class, our first point was conditions in the jails and prisons for political prisoners, as contrasted to today when we don't have political prisoners, just criminals. Second point, don't talk to the prosecutor. Third point, Hitler speaking in his own defense. And the fourth point, sentencing. So now we're on to the third point. Hitler speaks in his own defense. Now, this is a couple pages here. I think they're important. What time? We got 25 minutes. This is a pretty long section. So let's blow through the first 3 pages. That's just when he starts talking. Yeah, I mean, it's important. So we might go over the hour today, but I think this is important. This is chapter 27, Defendant Hitler, in The Trial of Adolf Hitler by David King. It says, reopening the trial before a courtroom brimming with anticipation, the presiding judge called Hitler to the stand. All eyes turned to the leader of the banned party, his hair neatly parted, his light blue eyes staring straight ahead, and his long, tapering fingers seeming out of proportion to his average-sized hands. David King, you will find in reading this, just cannot pass up an opportunity to insult Hitler. It's just annoying. It interferes with, no matter how you feel about Hitler, it interferes with the narrative. It's just bad writing when every sentence you've got an insult in there. He would use them, that is his fingers, theatrically, like an actor. His face, according to a reporter from Munich's Allgemeine Rundschau, resembled a rather dashing Austrian sergeant. As was customary in German criminal law procedure of the time, the presiding judge led the interrogation. So I'm glad we did read this, because that was one of the points I wanted to make. The questions, however, stemmed largely from the prosecution. The judge was, therefore, during this stage of the proceedings, supposed to be speaking for Stenglein and Erhard. So, major difference from how we do things today. In Europe, to my understanding, I'm not a lawyer in Europe, but to my understanding, from when I was in Europe and in law school, they still have judge-led prosecutions and judge-led questioning where the judge is allowed to elicit testimony. Now, that sometimes happens here in America. During a bond proceeding, a judge might ask a question, or during a sentencing, a judge might ask questions of the defendant, but largely, questioning of the defendant is just the prosecutor does that, and the defense attorney does that. Judges are kind of, aloof and neutral, and they don't get involved in those things. In this case, the judge was very much involved in these things. It was the judge questioning Hitler. And here's what you're going to find. This is why I think it's important to read this section. The judge isn't asking him yes or no questions like a cross-examiner would. And the judge isn't asking him what happened next, and trying to rein him in and see where he's going, know where he's going to go and pull him back if he goes off. The judge is asking him a question and actually allowing Hitler to respond. We have definitely learned our lesson there. We don't do that. God forbid you let a man talk in his own defense in court. He has to be asked a specific question, and he gives you an answer responding to that. And if his answer doesn't respond to that, we move to strike as non-responsive. Stricken from the record. Jury's not allowed to consider it. One of the most vivid examples of controlling what a defendant says in his own defense at a trial is Charles Manson. Right? Super famous trial in America. We could do a whole series just on that trial. One of the things the prosecution did that was brilliant, they did a lot of brilliant things, but one of the things they did that was brilliant was they told the judge, look, this guy is basically a wizard. He's going to entrance everybody in this courtroom, especially the jury. We have no idea what he's going to say. We want this defendant to proffer his testimony. We want to know what he's going to say before we bring in the jury, and they're subjected to this psychopathic mesmerism, right? And the judge says, okay, let's do that. And Manson gets up on the stand, and he goes into this now immortal tirade about the system. And then in the end, the judge said, okay, I don't see any problem with that. Do you want to take the stand and testify now before the jury? And Manson says, nah, I've pretty much said all I want to say. What a character. So that's one of the lessons we learned from Hitler. For the love of God, don't let these political prisoners, or, white nationalist, supremacist, extremist, Nazi monsters, don't ever let them actually speak on their own behalf. We got to rein in that testimony. One of the first concerns in the biographical introduction was confirming that the Austrian-born Hitler was not a German citizen, and consequently, if convicted of high treason, subject to be deported. That's actually one of the questions judges ask in our plea colloquies now. Do you understand that if you're not a U.S. citizen, conviction here can lead to your deportation? So he goes into his background, coming to Germany for painting, earning his own bread, etc., etc. Then he gets into his background about the First World War, which at that time was the Great War. Interesting, they called it the First World War in this book. That's an anachronism. Talking about his Iron Cross First Class. And basically at the end it says, by the end of this testimony, he was a German patriot and not an Austrian foreigner. At 11:53 a.m., only minutes into the public proceedings, Neithout, that is the judge, called a break for lunch. Under the judge's careful questioning, Hitler had made an unmistakable first impression as a good German patriot who had volunteered for military service, earned high distinctions for his bravery, and nearly died for his sacrifices on behalf of his adopted country. This was a peculiar opening for a trial of a non-German citizen charged with high treason. So this is how the entire trial is turned on its head. At least that's the beginning of it. As this trial goes on, and Hitler is allowed to speak, he completely flips, and not just him, but the defense attorneys as well, they flip the entire case onto the prosecution. One of the biggest things that they keep pointing out over and over and over and over, there was a triumvirate at the time. They were certainly guilty of the putsch, certainly guilty of the bloodshed resulting from the putsch. Why were they never arrested? What connections did they have to the prosecutor's office? This was a politically motivated trial. The prosecution arrested this group of people, but not that group of people. Why? It was clearly selective prosecution, and the defense pointed it out over and over and over. We've learned from that too. Can't do that in court. So, during recesses in the proceedings, police escorted the defendants back to their cells on the other end of the second floor corridor. 8 rooms had been allocated there for their accommodation, and 2 others had been set aside for use during meals and breaks by defendants who were not required to remain there. General Ludendorff, who returned every evening to his villa, and Ernst Pune, who, I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm not a German speaker, who, given his illness, was granted this privilege as well. Hitler was accommodated in room 160 near the far end of the corridor. The space was simple and Spartan. The one luxury in this former cadet dorm room was a white tablecloth with a vase of posies. For the duration of the trial, Hitler and the defendants were allowed 2 hours of daily exercise in the rear courtyard or occasionally in the Academy's gymnasium. They could also smoke, if desired, and drink beer in moderate amounts. God. Just amazing. They get 2 hours a day to exercise in the courtyard. In a modern jail, you're lucky if you get outside for 30 minutes. And not even a day. Like every other day, maybe every third day, you might get 30 minutes in the yard, or at least you'll get the chance to. You're on lockdown 17 hours a day, wherever you go. Amazing. Every day they get 2 hours of exercise in the courtyard or in the Academy's gymnasium. How posh. They could smoke and drink beer in moderate amounts. Unheard of. In the modern jail, getting a hamburger is literally like the greatest luxury, and that is once a week. You can do that. There were rooms set aside for the judges and court staff, prosecutors and press, witnesses, and the various units of the criminal police and security service. Rode and the defense counsel also had their own room for breaks. This was accessible by a door in the back of the courtroom. The lawyers had also rented a suite on the 3rd floor of the building down the street. The huge workloads, it was predicted, would not allow them much leisure time, let alone the opportunity to return home. When the court reconvened at 2:30 p.m. for the afternoon session, Judge Neidhart asked Hitler to make his opening statement. Your Honor, Hitler began, standing in the front of the courtroom with his Iron Cross first and second class pinned to his black coat. As the correspondent for Berlin's socialist Wösische Zeitung noted, Hitler would put on a strong performance that showed unquestionable skill. The reporter called him a genius at appealing to the proletariat. Hitler started off in a courteous and restrained manner, almost nervous. As he progressed with his statement, Frankfurter Zeitung observed, he assumed the sharp and harsh tones of a commando barking orders with excitement. The rawness of his voice softened and amplified at will, rising to a shout or falling again, nearly breaking at an emotional crescendo into a hoarse shrill. All of this, the correspondent added, he exploited to dramatic effect. It was a dazzling performance, Market-Grafinger Wolkenblatt said. The foreign correspondent for La Croix thought Hitler addressed himself less to the judges than to the audience, and posed as a modern tribune of the people. A reporter for L'Echo de Paris compared him to a charlatan hawking his wares on a street corner. I think we can safely assume L'Echo de Paris was a communist rag. With confidence and verbosity in no short supply, Hitler often grew animated in the witness box. He underscored his statements by raising one hand in the air, index finger skyward, or lifting both hands, palms facing each other as he glanced toward the ceiling. At other times, he pointed directly and aggressively at the state prosecutor. His fervor was reflected in the intensity of his gaze. It was not difficult, a reporter for Le Petit Parisien concluded, to imagine this man's success with young Bavarians in a beer hall. Hitler would talk for at least 3 hours that afternoon. The audience in the courtroom would receive its first impression of Hitler's autobiography, and this carefully crafted statement stands as a chilling display of fact management. All right, well, let's hold on there. Let's stop this trolley for a second. Let's talk about the Sines v. Kessler case, just as a reference point. Specifically, let's talk about Chris Cantwell's performance in the Sines v. Kessler case. One of the reasons we don't have political prisoners. We don't allow criminals with extremist backgrounds to speak in court on their own behalf, at length, without restraint, is because of this. We don't want them winning over the public. We don't want people hearing them saying what they have to say. We don't want people grandstanding and using the courts to further their own political agenda. At least not if they're on the right wing. We want them very constrained. We want them in the time limits. We want them to stick to the subject. We want all of their questions to be relevant. And we certainly don't want it to get out to the public that someone is tearing apart everything in the courtroom, like Chris Cantwell. From what I understand, it was illegal for anyone to record the proceedings. I wasn't there. I have nothing to do with this. It's my understanding it was illegal for anyone to record any of the proceedings that took place in that courtroom. And yet, a week or two ago, the cross-examinations by Cantwell were leaked on the internet machine. Devastating. Just devastating to the case by this machine, this communist machine that went after all these people. Well, and me, but I was never served. So, Cantwell, and I have talked with him, so it's not like I'm insulting him. He knows that, a lot of people didn't like him for a long time and were suspect of him, and I was not among those people. I would behind the scenes tell those people, defend his integrity behind the scenes. After that trial, I don't think anyone questions that anymore. Because that trial was Cantwell's trial. His arguments, his preparation, his cross-examinations, everything he did in that trial completely turned it upside down on its head. That is exactly the sort of thing we're trying to prevent in America, in our enlightened times, in our enlightened judicial system. That's why you're allowed to call in and listen, but we don't want this actually getting out to the public. We don't want people making recordings of this. We don't want people sound clipping what Cantwell is doing. Goodness sake. He might gain support. And he did. Even before these leaked things came out. That turned around the public for Cantwell. Not that he was grandstanding, which is what he's going to be accused of, but that he was actually able to question the other side and put forward a defense. God forbid! And the public heard it. And it was devastating. That's the sort of thing we've learned from. And every now and then you get a Chris Cantwell throwing a wrench in the machine, but for the most part, we're pretty good at not having political prisoners, not allowing them to go off and say crazy things like, their political opinions, which are totally irrelevant to the crimes they've committed. We don't let them just make statements. We, don't let them ask irrelevant questions. We've learned a lot of things from the trial of Adolf Hitler. All right? Hitler would talk for at least 3 hours that afternoon. No, sirree, Bob. Not in America, you ain't talking for no 3 hours. Especially when you got co-defendants. We gotta get out of here. All right? Plaintiffs, so the prosecution can have all the time they want, but if you got co-defendants, you gotta split that time with them. Prosecution, let's say, gets I don't know, let's say they get 3 hours. Well, if you are a defendant and you've got 2 other defendants, just to make it clean and simple, you don't each get 3 hours. You get 3 hours just like the prosecution did, which means you each get 1 hour. That's fair, right? The audience in the courtroom would receive its first impression of Hitler's autobiography, and this carefully crafted statement stands as a chilling display of fact management. All right, and then it goes into his military stuff again. Defendant Hitler began by returning to a part of his past that was clearly a source of pride and a valuable component of his defense, his military service. Reminding the courtroom of his very good rating based on 6 years of service, Hitler boasted of how he had learned as a soldier, quote, to respect his superiors, contradict no one, and obey blindly, end quote. Hitler's emphasis on his own military background was so pronounced that New Zealand's Auckland Star referred to him throughout its piece, without irony, as Lieutenant Colonel Hitler. A journalist for the British United Press identified him as Herr von Hitler. After trying to show that he had the character of a soldier, not a traitor, Hitler spoke of his youth as his second formative experience that shaped his outlook. At age 17, he had moved to Vienna, where he had been, as he put it, forced to earn my own bread. Hitler would repeat this phrase several times that afternoon. His vocabulary would, as several journalists pointed out, alternate between low German phrases and the expressions of a self-taught man. Which is another thing. They just can't help themselves. Right? If you read the... I'm not running into the library to get it. I forget who the translator is. It's the one you get at Barnes & Noble, right, of Mein Kampf. Whoever that guy is, is it Ralph Mannheim? Whoever that guy is that translated that and puts the footnotes in there and all that, they just can't help themselves. I remember it's like at the very beginning of the book, he's talking about, well, Hitler made this reference to the Odyssey, but that doesn't mean he actually read the Odyssey. I mean, Hitler was, probably basically illiterate, okay? He's not intelligentsia like us. They just can't help themselves. He makes all of these historical references, but, he probably learned that from movies or something, or, I don't know. He definitely didn't read that in books. He's not that smart. Huh. Where were we? In Vienna, Hitler said he had discovered 2 major crises of the modern world. The first was, quote, the great misery and great poverty of a broad strata of people, end quote. The second was, quote, the racial problem, that rendered the masses vulnerable to what he called, quote, the greatest enemy and adversary of all Aryan humanity, end quote. Hitler made no mistake that he had left the city of renowned diversity as, quote, an absolute anti-Semite, end quote. Hitler would later expand on this theme, emphasizing the rise of his own anti-Semitism in Vienna and claiming that his hard lessons there provided the granite foundation for his worldview. This idea, which he made a cornerstone of his autobiography, would persist in biographies for years, though historians have begun to question the accuracy of this statement. Yeah. And then it goes into all this, rat tit-for-tatting nonsense. Oh, well, look at this year, and look at this, and look at this. If that was the case, then why did he do this? Hitler not returning Munich with his battalion. And then it's talking about how he was serving in a left-wing government during the Red Republic, and he didn't want that known. So he lied in the trial. And all this may be true. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, irrelevant to what we're talking about here. Many of Hitler's colleagues, they didn't deny it, but he did prevent the truth about his past from becoming discovered. And that was basically that he had helped. I'm not trying to cover this up. I'm just trying to blow through these 2 pages here because we're out of time. He had helped during the Red Republic, during an educational propaganda campaign, and then he tried to cover it up later, saying that he just resisted it, right? So, then, without pausing, Hitler embarked on a vicious tirade on the dangers of these left-wing ideologies. Marxism, in particular, the defendant said, growing animated, threatened civilization wherever it emerged. It taught good German citizens to raise their fists at authority and seek to carve out a state within a state. Ironically, the same charges that the prosecution was now making against him. Ha! The presiding judge did not interrupt Hitler's long-winded rant. Many of the members of the audience no doubt shared these sentiments. No objection was made when Hitler called the communists, quote, not even human, end quote, or when he raced ahead to his unqualified conclusion, quote, Germany will only be saved when the last Marxist has been converted or crushed, end quote. Do not be fooled, warned Berlin's communist paper Die Rote Fahne, highlighting the defendant's attempts to dupe the unsuspecting public with his manufactured tales of personal suffering and his socialism for dummies. The paper would later dub Hitler and his ilk the racist rat catchers, spewing an ideology of despair and confusion calculated to attract the vulnerable masses. Hitler had indeed wasted no time in turning his treason trial into a stage for Nazi propaganda. He was also painting a self-portrait that would appeal to his followers. Tracing his anti-Semitism and right-wing roots back to his years in pre-war Vienna served him well, helping conceal his earlier involvement with a rival party that he was now so fiercely denouncing. So, for the third part, speaking in your own defense, up to you. It's always going to be on a case-by-case basis. You have the right to testify on your own behalf. You have the right to remain silent. It's up to you, right? Could go either way. It's up to you and your attorney to hash that out, discuss it, all the rest. But I can tell you, it ain't going to be Hitler's trial. You're not going to have all this leeway and a sympathetic judge who cares about your country and, you know, all your rights and all these things that you think are so important. This trial cannot happen today. Okay, so if you think you're going to testify on your own behest and go on your own behalf in your defense and go Hitler on the courtroom, you're not in any courtroom I know of anyway. Food for thought. So that's number 3. For those of you coming into class late, the 4 things we are talking about today in the trial of Adolf Hitler are, number 1, conditions in the jails and prisons for political prisoners, which we don't have today. We only have criminals. Number 2, don't talk to the prosecutor or the cops before the trial. Number 3, speaking in your own defense at trial. We've just concluded that. And number 4, sentencing. Let's go to sentencing. Would these decorated defendants now be punished for committing high treason against the state? Controversial, too, was the appearance of Dr. Friedrich Weber. He sported a dress sword and the blue cap of the band Bund Oberland. Wearing this attire was yet another show of contempt at the law of the German Republic, though Judge Neidhart would make no objection when he saw Weber. The first of the trial participants to take his seat in the front was the brash defense lawyer Karl Kohl. At 10 a.m. or shortly thereafter, the defendants entered the room. Ludendorff in front, followed by Hitler and the entourage of lawyers. The prosecutors came immediately afterward. At 5 minutes after 10, Judge Neidhart and the tribunal took their seats in the large leather chairs at the long wooden table. Neidhart looked grave and nervous. After 5 weeks of high anticipation, the verdict was read with little fanfare. Hitler, the judge began loudly and slowly, was pronounced guilty of high treason. Stirring and murmurs of disapproval emanated from the gallery, as did cries of unacceptable and scandalous. Outside the building, beyond the barbed wire blockades, a large crowd had gathered despite official orders to the contrary. These people would soon shout and curse when the news arrived from reporters rushing out to file their stories. 3 of Hitler's co-defendants received the same verdict: Weber, Kriebel, and Pune. The punishment would be 5 years in prison and a small fine, though the sentence was reduced for time already served since the arrest, which in Hitler's case meant a reduction of 4 months and 2 weeks. For defendants convicted of high treason, Article 81 of the German Penal Code required lifelong imprisonment in a penitentiary or a fortress prison. The Munich court, however, had invoked extenuating circumstances that permitted the sentencing of 5 to 15 years, and opted for the absolute minimum penalty. It then interpreted the law in such a way that Hitler and his fellow conspirators would be eligible for parole after only 6 months. And then these other defendants were found guilty of aiding and abetting high treason, and then Ludendorff was acquitted of all charges, and he walked. And then the judge goes into his explanation of the ruling and why he came to this decision, and why, yes, there were other people the prosecution didn't arrest because they were selectively prosecuting, but we're not talking about them today because they're not here on trial, yada, 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 yada. The important part is this. Article 81 required life in prison. And the judge said, well, there are extenuating circumstances here. We're going to choose the part of the statute that says 5 to 15 years in prison. And then I'm going to sentence them to the absolute minimum of 5 years. And then I'm going to give them parole in about 6 months. So we're talking like less than a year Hitler and his boys got in prison for high treason. Now compare that with modern America. Our enlightened liberal system, where we do not have political prisoners, we would never put someone on trial for their political speech. This trial could never happen again, because we're smarter than that, and we're more civilized, and we would never do that. Consider this. Stuart Rhodes, founder and head of the Oath Keepers, is sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for sedition. Not killing anybody. Nobody died. Not because of his actions anyway. Right? 18 years in federal prison. If I remember correctly, the prosecution was asking for 25. Now check this out. Enrique Tarrio. He was scheduled for sentencing at 10 a.m. today. Judge had an emergency. Nobody knows what it was. Just canceled the whole docket. It had nothing to do with Tarrio. It was just a freak accident, freak occurrence. He's now scheduled for next Tuesday for sentencing. Prosecutors in Tarrio's case, head of the Proud Boys, if you don't know who Enrique is, prosecutors are asking for 33 years in prison. 33 years for J6. He wasn't even there. Asking for 33 years in prison. We don't have political prisoners like Adolf Hitler, treated under honorable conditions at a so-called fortress prison where duelists and counts and other aristocratic gentlemen get to go because they're being prosecuted for their political views. No. We put people like Rhodes and Tarrio in isolation, or best case scenario in general population with all the other real criminals, because we don't care about their politics or their political motives. We don't even factor that in. They committed crimes. They are criminals. They're nothing special just because they have political views. Consider this. Trump is looking at about 1,000 years in prison right now across 4 indictments in 4 different places. Georgia, Florida, D.C., New York, if I remember correctly. Looking about 1,000 years. More time than even James Fields, who's definitely not a political prisoner, who's sentenced to life plus 419 years. Adolf Hitler and his boys got about 10-something months in prison. In what amounts to a gymnasium, like a military academy. Super cool place to be. They could have boxing fights and sparring and drink beer. Well, we learned our lesson, didn't we? We'll never treat the far right like gentlemen again. We know better. Now, we treat them like criminals. As they are, as they should be. I go to jail like everybody else now, baby. And for 1,000 years at a time. So, that's effectively our program for the day. We're about 7 minutes over. Let's look at the comments here. Didn't take a single comment all night. Invictus, welcome back, says Frost Azathirn. Well, thank you, buddy. Good evening, Mr. Invictus, says Kitty Kitty. Good evening, Kitty Kitty. Good evening, Jimmy. How's it going? Volksstärke. How's it going? Guilty until you prove yourself innocent, says Missouri Battle Flag. 100,000%. We've talked about that in previous episodes here, too. Not in political cases, even. But I think we talked about that last episode. About violations of probation and how you're guilty until you're proven innocent. And the entire thing is turned upside down. Let's see. Looking through these comments here, seems to be a debate about the gods. I don't know. We should absolutely do a future episode on the Manson trial, says Jimmy Manson. No prejudice. We might do that. It's a good example of a showboat prosecutor making a name for himself and twisting facts. But what a crazy story. He represented himself, says Love is Everything. Actually, Hitler did have a lawyer. What is his name? It's not Lorenzo. That wouldn't be very German. Lonzo? Lorenz Roeder. That was his name. He did have a lawyer. What are you going to do? You got a client like Hitler? He's going to do whatever he wants to do. Jimmy says, I remember Chris's trial, and they left him about 12 minutes for his closing statement. 12 minutes! Man, there are closing arguments that can go on for 2-3 hours. Chris Cantwell got 12 minutes for his closing statement. How does that suit you? Definitely not a political prisoner either. Which is another thing to point out about these jail conditions, right? For these political prisoners in Germany, 1920s, versus our totally not political prisoners now. Hitler's in honorable conditions in a minimum security wing of this jail. Has a typewriter, has open communications with the outside world, is able to communicate with everybody on the outside. Contrast that with what they did to Cantwell during this trial. And he talks about this in The Radical Agenda. I'm sorry, I don't know what episode number it was, but it was like the last week or two he did this episode. About his closing argument in the Sines trial, and he talks about his conditions, how he was forced to prepare, quote unquote, prepare for this trial, how he was forced to appear at this trial without any preparation whatsoever, how they took his evidence, they took everything he was using to prepare and said, well, sorry about that, nothing we can do. He's shuttled from one prison to another with no materials. I mean, it's nightmarish. It's third world level insane. Just do yourself a favor, do me a favor, do your family a favor. Go listen to that episode of Radical Agenda where he talks about how he was shuttled around from prison to prison, how he got to this trial, and how what he had to do to prepare for it. And then, like you said, they gave him 12 minutes for a closing argument. That's America. Okay, that is the prison system, the trial system that no one wants to talk about. Even the liberals who pretend that they care about the poor inmates and the socioeconomic downtrodden, this, that, and the other, they don't care about any of that. They don't care about the conditions at the jails. I've never seen an NPR reporter as an inmate. Have you? Never seen anyone from the ACLU coming into these jails, looking around, caring about inmates. They don't care. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about what inmates go through. Just in a general sense, but especially when it comes to how are you going to prepare for trial? How are you going to assist your own lawyer? Or if in the case of Chris Cantwell and others, you are representing yourself, how in God's name are you going to prepare your own defense when you're not even allowed to have your own materials, and when all of the discovery, all the evidence that is electronic, and you're not allowed to have a computer, obviously? It's absolute insanity. It's a Kafkaesque nightmare. And we pretend we're the most civilized country, the freest country in the world. So please listen to the Radical Agenda. That episode, anyway. Love is Everything says, I will forward this stream to my attorney to hear. Good. Thank you. All attorneys should be listening to this program. I love you guys in the audience. You've been with me for years. Some of you even used to listen to Guerrilla Radio. But really, I do this program for other attorneys, because I wish to God they would wake up to what they're doing. I wish to God they would think about what they are doing with this system in which we all serve. I wish they would be more ethical, especially the prosecutors. I really, seriously, sincerely am of the opinion now that all lawyers, judges, and cops should spend an extended period of time in jail before they are allowed to practice. 100% dead serious about that. At least if you're in the criminal side of things. Maybe not if you're a civil lawyer. Maybe you should just be bankrupted or evicted or something so you understand what you're doing. But these prosecutors, judges, defense attorneys, I really think they should spend some time in jail and understand what it means to your life to be in there, and your family, and everyone around you. That man has a great podcast channel. I definitely recommend it, says Jimmy. I'm assuming you mean Cantwell. I don't know. Guy whose name I never say on this program because I assume it's a bad word says, hello, Augustus. Nice to catch you live. Looking forward to listening later. Good luck, brother. You inspire many. Thank you very much, guy whose name I can't say. Much appreciated. The massage said, thank you. Back at you. Also, if you could, please recommend a good book on natural law. Ooh. Good question. I would recommend Aquinas. Yeah, I would recommend Aquinas. Yep, St. Thomas Aquinas. That's the source material. But you know what? I'll put some thought into that. You know what? A good introductory book, and Catholic, Professor Brian McCall, To Build the City of God. I think that's a great book. I'd recommend that one. Hit like, you Philistines, says Garfield, but racist. Yeah, no one ever likes these. There's 22 people watching right now. We got 18 likes. I guess that's a pretty good ratio. But yeah, if you could share this, that'd be swell. I never get any views. I keep getting advised to do video instead of audio. I just can't do it, man. I got so much work to do. I can't be doing a, television production over here. The Polished Gent. Hi, Augustus. Perhaps irrelevant to the topic, but I cannot help but see a connection between your story and that of Blessed Bartolo Longo. I thank you. I suppose. Still working on the confessions. No one wants to publish it. I don't know. If you know any publishers, The Polished Gent, I'll get that story out there about my conversion. So, you're mentioning Stuart. Yes. Yeah, Stuart Rhodes. We've talked about that in a few episodes previously. He had nothing nice to say about any of us. Right? I actually spoke with Stuart Rhodes at an event in Boston once. back in 2017. And after that, yep, he had nothing nice to say about us. But be that as it may, and whatever your feelings for the Oath Keepers and Mr. Rhodes are, the fact is they are absolutely political prisoners. The man he's been sentenced to 18 years in prison, for God's sake. For what? I don't care how boomer you think he is about his views on racists and Democrats are the real racists and all that. Yeah, that's all, internet meme wars. The fact of the matter is this is a flesh and blood man who has been fighting for his country for years, and they just put him away for 18 years. It's a tragic case that everybody should be on the same page on that one. All right, so let's keep going down here through these comments. Can't comment on that. We love Big Brother, 100%. We sure do, Jimmy. Everybody here loves everything. God bless you, Invictus. The only way to heaven is the Bible way, not some church of lying men. Well, we'll have to agree to disagree there, buddy. Traveling notifications came through. Surveillance state used to my advantage. All right, well, glad something went right tonight with the surveillance state. Good to see all you guys. Thanks for showing up here. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for your donations. Just kidding. We don't take those. So, where are my folders here? All right, so I don't think we're going to do a follow-up of Hitler's trial. I think that's pretty much everything we wanted to cover. So much content in here. We already did the trial of Ezra Pound. Maybe we'll do another good trial later, or maybe next time we'll do some current events. I don't know, some legal news. We'll see. Recovering Libertarian says, by far a great show. It is highbrow in a good way. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Share the show around, says Volkstärke. Let's get the numbers up. Yeah, that'd be sweet. We can never get over 500 views on this show. Never. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a shadow ban. Maybe it's just not appealing. I don't know. So, in any event, all y'all stay in school. Stay out of politics. It's horrible. We love Big Brother. And we will check y'all next week. Till then. Or not.